Hello and welcome to the X-Files with me, Christiane Amanpour.
And Jamie Rubin.
This is the Q&A bonus episode where we answer your questions. So thanks, as always, for everybody who sends them in. Keep sending them in. Ask anything you like, as you always do. And our handle is at amanpourpod, or email us at amanpourpod@global.com. And don't forget, you can now watch these episodes and this Q&A episode on YouTube as well. Just search Christiane Amanpour Presents on YouTube and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss an episode. Let's get started. Jamie, I'm going to ask you the first question. So this is from Marcin on email. I was surprised by Jamie's assertion in a recent episode that the Democratic Party needs to move more towards the center to win. Observing recent elections in the US and Europe, I had the impression that this strategy only alienates voters. Is there really an untapped potential of truly centrist voters to make up for the lost leftist votes?
Right. Look, tough decision for the Democratic Party to make. What's the best way to win elections? There's always been these two theories. Those on the left insist that it's alienated leftist voters that have caused Donald Trump to win twice. I don't believe that. I believe that it's people in the center who've lost respect for the Democratic Party. And I'll just give you one example, which I think most people, when they hear it, can agree what the problem is. In 2020, almost all the candidates on the stage in the Democratic primaries debates, almost all of them said they were for decriminalizing illegal immigration, open borders. They actually said that anyone should be able to come to the United States without going through a legal immigration process. They can just come in. Immigration is a global problem. It's an easy thing to be for people to misuse and attack immigrants unfairly and to alienate people at home. I think the Democrats have two problems. One is immigration, and two is the emotionalism of America. It's not economics. I mean, Democratic people always think if we just prove we can help people more, they'll vote for us. They're not voting their economy. They're not voting what's good for them economically. They're voting on their emotions that Donald Trump, unfortunately, and the Republican Party often can tap into very successfully. And immigration is a great example of that. Let's find a way for us to get people voting on the emotion of climate change, changing the climate so that we can save the world. That should be something emotional. And that's more what I would argue we should do than trying to appeal to identity politics of the far left with regard to transgender issues, which really got us off the wrong wicket, and immigration issues to say that anyone can come to America. Those are issues that appeal to the left that I think would make us lose even worse.
So I'm going to disagree with you. I mean, I obviously agree that neither extreme is a sensible governing position, neither extreme, either extreme right or extreme left. But I do think that one of the other issues, I disagree about the economy and people's pocketbook. They always vote their pocketbook. And I think one of the biggest issues in the United States right now, and actually around the world, is the growing and massive inequality gap. And I think you'll see some of these younger politicians who are appealing to Gen Z, and let's take Zoran Mamdani, the Democratic candidate in New York. Inequality and the equality gap is something that he has really tapped into, and it's really resonated. And he's not an executive, in terms of on the national level, but in terms of a big city, it's an important issue. And just now, as you know, Jamie, the mainstream leaders of the Democratic Party have been struggling. They haven't endorsed him, etc. But just now, Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, has done, despite the fact that they have very differing views on certain issues. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see. And Trump is having some economic problems. Inflation is going up. It's going to potentially come home to roost. And also, he's having a lot of problems with the Hispanic and Latino community, given the immigration issue, which he has cracked down on that community. Many of whom voted for him in 2024.
Before we go there, let's just talk about this just for a moment more. So remember when we were married and we were living in London, and everyone said that Brexit was bad for the pocketbook of the British people,
Hmm.
bad for it. And all the economists were clear on that. There was just no way you could argue that
Hmm.
voting for Brexit was good for your pocketbook.
And
And I
that's
thought,
proven to be the case.
right, but they won the vote based on emotions and
Right.
immigration. And that's why I think sometimes we assign too much political value to judgments about economic effects and not enough value to the emotional appeal that Republicans, and in that case, the Brexit vote people gave to, what you might call, I don't know, emotional
I know.
nationalist issues.
You're making a case for populism, and we don't want to make a case for
No,
populism necessarily.
just that it worked for them, and that we should
Yeah.
remember it and find our popular issues like climate change could be a great
Yeah.
issue for
Or
young people.
inequality, the equality gap. That's a big deal, and
Well,
it goes beyond just
all
economics.
right.
Anyway,
Well,
we've got
let's
a
see
lot of
how that goes.
questions.
Let me ask you your
Yeah.
thoughts. Can you tell us what your thoughts are on the recent protests in Nepal? What do you think of the interim prime minister?
Okay, so I think this had a lot to do. It's Gen Z. It had a lot to do with the sclerotic, government and system, and it had a lot to do with the inequality gap. What do I think of the interim prime minister? Well, I think there was a lot of violence committed on the streets, and the interim prime minister, we will see. She's been taken from the Supreme Court background. It's the first time they've done this. It is a woman, and it's an interesting departure. But as people say, okay, Gen Z, you won the street battle. Now come up with a plan. And that's what's going to be difficult. It's what's facing Bangladesh after they got rid of their prime minister and after the wonderful social economist Mohammed Yunus came in as an interim leader. There's there they have to come up with plans to run. So we'll see what they come up with. But anyway, you
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this Nepal's a very unusual country. It's gone back and forth between China and the West. And, it's, remember, the home of the Gurkhas. And one of the things I read about that was really interesting is the Nepalese military is the only institution that everyone trusts in that country. And so it was the uniformed military, not the
yes.
police, the military, who came to the rescue of Nepal because they are so respected and they're great soldiers, let's face
Hmm.
it, and they're the ones who figured out a compromise that ended the violence. So
Yeah.
Nepal has some lessons to teach us about institutional trust and how you lose it, how you gain it.
What's the obsession with making every country democratic, Jamie? All governments have pros and cons, and the United States has never allowed a truly socialist country to succeed. We either cut them off financially or wage war with them, so what's the benefit?
Well, first of all, democracy and socialism are not necessarily against each other. You can have believe in social democracy. You can believe in socialist economic principles and still allow people to vote. What happened to socialism was that communist China and communist Russia, Soviet Union, didn't bring any democracy. When Marx and Lenin Marx wrote his books, people were supposed to be able to participate in their government, and instead it turned out this elite was going to rule everything and create a totalitarian hell. So that's what's wrong with the Soviet Union. That's what's wrong with the Communist Party of China. I love telling the story because people need to wake up. If the Communist Party of China becomes dominant and their country becomes dominant in the world, in China, they have something called a social credit score. They use your telephone to determine what things you listen to, whether you follow Communist Party ideology, whether you've made comments that are against the government. And based on that, your ability to get, for example, health care can be lost. You can lose the ability to get a new kidney if you need it, if you do the wrong thing. And here's the worst part. Imagine this: 1984, a book about the horror of George Orwell's 1984, the big screen, they're watching you, Big Brother. In China, if you turn your telephone off, and they lose the ability to monitor you, find out what you're saying, doing, buying, listening to, moving, they knock on your door and say, "Why is your
Yeah,
phone off?"
yeah, it's not
That's
good.
not a world I want to live in. That's a
No,
reason
but
to be against the Communist Party of China
right.
and be in
But
favor of democratic government.
yes. The questioner was, obviously not saying that we should be in favor of totalitarian communism or any other kind of totalitarianism, but socialism. So I have observed, being a foreigner in the United States and coming from Europe, that in America they go, bananas over the word socialism, and there's been, they think we're just everybody's a bunch of communists. The Labour Party, the Social Democrats in, all over Europe that go into coalitions regularly and have been incredibly successful. Yes, there are difficulties everywhere, but I think certainly Scandinavia and has a lot to teach us about socialism in that in the welfare and in the equality picture, and they're enlightened on women's rights, on the education, on all sorts of things like that. Nobody's perfect, but America always conflates that social democrat thing with out and out communism. All right, Jamie, you
Are
are
going to
going.
ask the next question.
Yes, and you may even answer it.
With purging of top officials at government agencies, including the military and other law enforcement, and the illegal militarization of the streets without declaring martial law, has the Trump administration not initiated the dismantling of the rule of law with the aid of a clearly politicized Supreme Court? If you want, I'll start on this one.
I think you should.
All right, it's in
It's your
America.
country,
It's my
after
home.
all.
In my home, yes. I think the Supreme Court is going to surprise some people. Let's take the biggest issue of abuse by the president, the ability to just launch economic warfare and trade wars all over the world using his powers that don't exist in the Constitution. The Constitution says economic commerce is regulated by the Congress. I think the Supreme Court, and I could be proven wrong, I think the Supreme Court is going to rule in favor of taking away Trump's powers. The rule of law still exists in my country. Trump is challenging it, is threatening it, is weakening it. Yes, I can't deny that, but it's still there. He has people who work for him in the government have to comply, even if he says he doesn't want to. But in the immigration services, in the military, in the restoring aid to Harvard, all of these defeats for Trump, the rule of law does reign supreme. He's just not. He's not doing what he can to enshrine the rule of law. He's challenging it, but I don't think he's going to win this. And I think it's one of the reasons he's going to lose the support of the American people. We are a country of laws. That's a fundamental belief of all Americans. And once they see the way Trump is denying that, I think he and his party are going to suffer accordingly.
I mean, the thing that's the most obvious on all of this visual is the deployment of the National Guard, sometimes actual troops, and of course, ICE. And that is worrying a lot of people, and it should worry a lot of people. And the next one they're talking about sending the National Guard and troops into is Memphis in Tennessee. And, they're being more, aggressive towards the mayor of Washington, D.C. And there's people have started to say no, no, not in our name. We don't want this. So I think that's pretty interesting. So Habe on Instagram asks, what could Israel's possible end goal be other than the unnecessary killing of civilians? Well, that's a pretty, bold and targeted question. But as we've discussed, Jamie and I, Israel is believed by the United States to have achieved its military goals last year, that it had pretty much got what it wanted to defang Hamas. And everything that's come since is extra and disproportionately leveled against civilians. And this is what is causing internal organizations inside Israel, external organizations, human rights organizations, governments, people around the world to turn against what Israel is doing. So, Jamie, it is a terrible thing. Now, way in the late 60,000 civilians have been killed. The starvation of people continues. And there are new reports, Jamie. I mean, they're pretty terrible. The Guardian and the BBC have done a report on this sort of American gang, paramilitary gang, that has advertised for Islamophobes to come and help patrol and deal with Gaza. These are some of the same people who are in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, who are meant to be allegedly, protecting these so-called humanitarian spaces, which have devolved into terrible places for killing those people who've come to try to get food. So this is very, very worrying. And then, of course, you've got the bombing of allies like Qatar. Jamie, take it away.
Well, there's two things going on, I think. Look, Christiane, you're exactly right. The goals were achieved a year ago. There is no reason for this war to continue. None. Other than maybe it's good for Prime Minister Netanyahu's political future. I don't know. That seems to be his view. If I were to give you any rationale for continuing this war and attacking on Qatar, which was a terrible mistake, and I think really, as an American, we have excellent military to military ties. We have a major air base in Doha. We have
Mhm.
major air bases and military relationships around the region. Israel's government is harming American national security
Yeah.
by harming our relationship with crucial friends and allies in the region. And I hope the Defense Department and the Trump administration realizes that this attack in Doha was something that hurt the national security of the United States. And if they can just understand that, maybe they can get through to the Israeli government. But the last point I would make on this, and I guess we're going to take one more question after this, is there are those in Israel, and I don't share their views. I think they're monstrous people who just want to pound the Palestinians into the sand because they think that's the best way to live in the region because it's a tough zone, they say. It's a tough part of town, and the meaner and tougher we are, and the more cruel we are, the safer we are. And they're wrong. The safest, best way to bring security to Israel is to end this war, get a peace agreement with the Saudi Arabian government, and end the conflict and have the dream of Israel's founders to be approved. But there are these people who seem to think the massive slaughter of the enemy is somehow going to make them safer. It's not. It's making them hated
Mhm.
around the world for a reason that isn't justified and isn't going to make them safer, no matter what they say. I don't believe that.
I just want to say one thing.
Yeah.
This week, there's been a group of Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia, which is the holy grail as far as Israel and the United States wanting normalization in that region. The former head of Saudi intelligence and former ambassador to the US and the UK, Prince Turki Al Faisal, who I speak to a lot for a view of the Saudi view, he's just had it. He says the United States must exert its influence with Israel. Remember, the United States approved, knew, as so did Israel, of Qatar as a negotiating, mediating partner, and it must punish Israel for this. Whether it does or not is remains to be seen. But the Arab states seem to be getting just more and more furious. Okay,
And
Jamie, go
that's
ahead.
bad for us. Last question. I'm
Yeah.
going to ask it to you since I don't know what I really think about all this. Let me just say regarding the missile attack on the drug vessel, is the United States allowed to just blow up a vessel since it's in international waters? Why didn't they just use the Navy and capture the ship?
Well, look, the president was asked again, and he hasn't ruled out doing it again. When we spoke about this sort of strongman post Yalta for the 21st century division of spheres of influence, we talked about would Trump essentially accept that China took the Pacific region, Russia took that part of Europe and threatened our part of Europe, and Trump, I guess from the Atlantic on west, takes the Western Hemisphere, and one of those is exerting power in the Western Hemisphere. Um, Many people say no, it wasn't justified, and this is an ongoing issue of how far can the United States take its military, for what reasons, and how far can it go in terms of the international rule of war? They were in international waters, so it's very, very tricky. This very tricky indeed, but it just shows that the whether it's in the Middle East, in Russia, in America, the and China, the first answer is military. Everybody's using their militaries, and there needs to be some diplomacy. There needs to be some creative diplomacy now to calm things down.
And the tragedy here is that Marco Rubio has this unique job as
Hmm.
President Trump's aide to camp. He's basically Trump's Senate staffer, if you think about it that way. And he knows how to be
He's
a
not going
Senate
to like
staffer because
that.
I know, but that's the way he's behaving because he's just agreeing to Trump stuff when it goes against completely his history as the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, where
Hmm.
he understood the risk from Russia, understood the risk from China, understood the value of AID. And instead, he's done everything President Trump wants to. And maybe he thinks in this area of the world he can play a bigger role because he's always had a special interest in Latin America and he's trying to get done things he wanted to do as a senator. But what he's forgetting is that Latin America became all democracies except for Cuba. And democracies, and now Venezuela, obviously, once it changed, democracies don't like to be bullied.
Hmm.
Look what is going on in Brazil, where the president of
Yeah.
Brazil, Marco Rubio, may not like Lula, but he was elected. He may not like that Bolsonaro is put in jail, but it's Brazil's democracy. And if you want to be successful as Secretary of State, the first thing you got to do is build your base. Who are your friends? Who are your allies? Then you bring them all together, and then you can have an impact on Russia and China. And instead, Secretary Rubio has forgotten all the rules of diplomacy, as best as I can tell, because they're bullying our friends and being altogether too nice to our adversaries and our enemies. This is the child of immigrants from Cuba who understands the danger from communism. Why is he letting Donald Trump, without fighting it? He doesn't have to work there. He could go back to being a senator. He could resign, if he
Hmm.
really believes in something. Why is he allowing Donald Trump to allow Vladimir Putin to run amok, potentially the Communist Party of China to run amok in Asia, and instead his big gain is that he can bully a Venezuelan vote? That's your big takeaway? It strikes me as very small compared to a person who I used to think really understood the world. And I guess I have to say I don't understand what he's doing unless it's just to get the nod from Trump to be the next president. And then maybe, you'll say, as they always do, oh, I'm just compromising now so I can get power later. And then you discover that all those compromises have changed you and you're
Doesn't
no
he have
longer the
to
person you
wait?
thought you
Yeah,
won.
he has to wait in line
Anyway,
because JD Vance is
I
is
know
in
that's the
line.
big
Yeah.
battle.
Yeah. So listen, that's it. But on that note, we'll have a lot more to say about these big international issues that we're talking about next week from New York, when, as I said, we will be there for the UN General Assembly, the annual gathering of global leaders. President Trump will be there. All these people who we've been talking about on our podcast for the last several months, and all these issues will be front and center. We'll have a bit more to say then. Right, Jamie. So thanks everybody for listening. If you're on YouTube, thank you for watching. Get on YouTube, do watch it, do listen to it. Remember that if you have a question for us, we do like it. We love to answer. We love to hear from you. And you can find us on all the major social media platforms. Our handle is at AmanpourPod, or email us. We're amanpourpod@global.com. Our next episode, as always, is out on Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, you can listen for free on Global Player. You can download it from the App Store or go to globalplayer.com. All right, bye-bye.
Bye from The Hague.